The war had ended, but the halls of the Zirath royal palace still carried the echo of loss. King Therex sat alone on the high balcony, his dark cloak fluttering in the cold wind that rolled over the spires of the capital city. From here, he could see the skyline, towering crystal towers and wide streets lined with glowing sky orbs. But his gaze was fixed far beyond the horizon. Somewhere out there, past the dust of forgotten battlefields, was the last place his daughter had been seen. Alive, Princess Virelia, his only child, his light, his reason for breathing. She had gone missing in the 7th month of the war, when the outer colonies fell to the invaders. Reports said her flagship had been destroyed while trying to evacuate civilians from Zarin 4. No escape pods were recovered. The wreckage had been scattered across an asteroid belt, like shattered bones of a giant. The king had listened to the final transmission more times than he cared to admit. A burst of static, a voice, Virelia's voice, cutting through the noise. "Enemy fire incoming! All hands!" And then silence. For weeks, rescue teams searched. For months, the king kept sending scouts, hoping for a miracle, but eventually, the war itself demanded all resources, and his advisors told him to stop. The official records declared her dead. The memorial fires were lit. But Therex never truly accepted it. He had fought in 3 wars before this one. He knew the smell of defeat, the weight of death. And yet, something in him refused to believe his daughter was gone. It was foolish hope. Perhaps dangerous hope. But it was the only thing that kept him from collapsing under the crown's weight. The War Council chamber, just below the balcony, still carried the tension of conflict. Today, however, the nobles and commanders spoke, not of battles, but of rebuilding. The enemy had been driven back beyond the rim. The capital was safe. The fleets were returning home. Still, for the king, victory felt hollow. He stepped back inside, letting the balcony doors close behind him. The chamber's light crystals glowed softly, casting pale blue across the marble floor. Around the great round table, his advisors waited for his words. Lord Chancellor Marvick, a tall, thin Zirath with silver scales down his neck, spoke first. "Your Majesty, the people need stability. We must secure trade routes, reassign military forces, and—" Therex cut him off with a raised hand. "And we will. But I have a question before we speak of numbers and patrols." Marvick's jaw tightened. "Yes, my king?" The king's eyes narrowed. "Have we truly exhausted all efforts to find survivors from Zarin 4? The room went silent. The council members exchanged uneasy looks. General Korath, a broad-shouldered veteran with one artificial arm, spoke carefully. "Your Majesty, with respect, that search was concluded almost 8 months ago. The debris field was complete. There were no signs of escape pods, no distress beacons. Even if there had been survivors then, the conditions—" "I did not ask for the past," Therex interrupted, his voice deepening. "I asked if we have exhausted all efforts, today, this moment." Marvick leaned forward, his tone slow and measured. "My king, with the war over, our resources must be focused elsewhere. You know this. The people need you here, not chasing shadows." Therex stared at him, and for a long moment, no one else dared speak. Finally, the king pushed away from the table. "Shadows," he said quietly. "That is all a man has, when he lets others tell him what to believe." He turned and left the chamber. That night, the king walked the silent palace corridors alone. The guards kept their distance. His boots echoed on the polished stone, past statues of ancient rulers and banners that once flew in triumph. He found himself standing before the great portrait of Virelia that hung in the Hall of Heirs. In the key painting, she wore ceremonial armor, polished to a silver-blue shine, with the crest of House Therex on her chestplate. Her eyes, sharp, determined, with a spark of mischief, looked as though they might step out of the frame and speak to him. He remembered the last time they had spoken in person. She had been preparing to depart for Zarin IV, commanding the evacuation fleet. "You should send someone else," he had told her. "I can't," she replied, fastening her gauntlets. "If I don't go, the people will think we've already abandoned them. They'll fight harder if they know I'm with them." "You are my daughter," Therix had said. "Not my general." She had smiled. "I am both, and I'll come back." Those had been her last words to him. The king lingered there, staring at the portrait until the light crystals dimmed for the night. In his private chambers, he removed his crown and placed it on the table beside the war map. His armor, black and silver, trimmed with the gold of royalty, rested on the stand in the corner. He poured himself a glass of amber fire wine but barely touched it. He thought of the strange emptiness that came with victory. The galaxy celebrated their survival, yet for him, the war had taken more than it had spared. Then, without warning, a sharp chime sounded from the comm terminal on his desk. The king frowned. It was late, too late for routine messages. He tapped. The crystal interface and a holographic image flickered into being. It was Admiral Sarek, commander of the Planetary Defense Fleet. His voice was urgent. "Your Majesty, I apologize for disturbing you, but we have an unusual situation." "What is it?" Therix asked. "One of our border patrols picked up a ship approaching the capital system. No identification codes, no registry. Small craft, battered hull. The pilot requested immediate audience with the Crown." "That is not unusual enough to wake me," Therix said flatly. Sarek hesitated. "The pilot claims to be Princess Virelia." The king's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. For a long, stunned moment, he said nothing. His pulse thundered in his ears. "Repeat that," he demanded. "She identified herself by name, rank, and royal security code," Sarek said. "The code is authentic, though it was supposed to have been deactivated after she was declared lost." The king's mind raced. It could be a trick, an enemy ploy, yet the thought, the impossible, fragile thought that it might truly be her, burned through him like lightning. "Where is the ship now?" he asked. "Entering the outer defense perimeter. Should we detain the pilot for questioning?" "No," the king said, his voice low but firm. "Escort them to the palace, at once." Sarek nodded and the hologram vanished. Therix stood in the center of his chamber, staring at nothing, his breath heavy. His heart told him to believe. His mind told him to prepare for disappointment. Either way, something was coming, something that would change everything. The palace courtyard had not seen this much activity since the day the war ended. Guards lined the grand steps in perfect formation, their silver armor glinting under the pale morning light. The air hummed with tension. Word had spread through the capital that an unidentified ship had arrived, claiming to carry the lost princess. But it wasn't only her name that stirred whispers. Rumors traveled fast, twisting with each retelling. "She's back from the dead. She's leading an invasion. She's brought a foreign champion with her." From the balcony above the courtyard, King Therix stood motionless, his eyes locked on the distant sky where the escort fleet approached. His expression betrayed nothing, but inside his chest, his heart pounded with a mix of hope and dread. The ship came into view, a small, battered transport, its hull scarred with blackened burns and deep cracks. This was no royal vessel. It was the kind of ship survivors used when they had nothing left but determination. The king descended the steps to meet it. His generals and ministers followed close behind, though some whispered warnings about caution, about traps. Therix ignored them. The transport landed with a hiss of venting steam. The boarding ramp lowered slowly, creaking as though it might collapse under its own weight. Then a figure appeared. She stepped out into the daylight, and the breath caught in the king's throat. Princess Virelia. Her ceremonial armor was battered, scratched, and scorched. The crest of House Theryx on her chestplate was faded, nearly worn away. Her once perfect braids were messy and tangled, but her posture, straight, proud, was unchanged. Her eyes scanned the courtyard until they found her father. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then she smiled. But before Theryx could take a step toward her, another figure appeared on the ramp. A human. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing worn, military fatigues of a design none of the palace guards recognized. His left arm was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, and a long rifle hung across his back. His boots were caked with red dust. He kept his head high, but his gaze sharp, scanning every guard as if measuring them for threat. The murmur among the crowd grew louder. A human, here, on Zirath, was almost unheard of. The two species rarely crossed paths, and when they did, it was usually in contested space. The war had not been with humans, but neither had the Zirath considered them allies. Virelia reached the bottom of the ramp first. She walked straight to her father and stopped a few feet away. "Father," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment, "I told you I would come back." Theryx searched her face, as if looking for proof she was real. "Virelia." His voice was low, rough. "How?" Her smile faded. "It's a long story, and I didn't survive it alone." She turned slightly, gesturing to the man standing just behind her. "This is Captain Elias Ward of the Terran Defense Forces. Without him, I would not be here." Elias gave a short nod, his expression unreadable. "Your Majesty." Theryx's eyes moved from his daughter to the human. "You crossed enemy lines to bring her home?" "I crossed a lot worse than that," Elias said. "The High Chancellor." Marvick stepped forward sharply. "Your Majesty, with respect, this man's presence is highly irregular. We have no confirmation of his identity or intentions. I recommend he be taken into custody until—" "No," Virelia interrupted, her voice suddenly firm. "If you lay a single hand on him, you'll answer to me." The courtyard fell silent. Even the guards froze. The king raised one hand to quiet the murmurs. "There will be no arrest. He stands here under my daughter's protection. That is enough for now." Marvick's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. The king led them into the palace, away from the watching crowd. They walked through long halls of crystal and steel, past guards who stood at attention but could not hide their curiosity. Elias took in every detail: the strange architecture, the alien murals depicting ancient battles, the soft blue light that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Inside the private reception chamber, the doors sealed shut, leaving only the king, the princess, Elias, and two silent guards at the far wall. Theryx turned to his daughter. "Tell me everything." Virelia's shoulders dropped slightly as though she'd been carrying the weight of the story for far too long. "When the flagship went down over Zarin 4, I was thrown clear in an escape pod. I landed far from the city, deep in the red wastes. No comms, no supplies. I thought I was the only survivor, until I found him." She nodded toward Elias. Elias spoke for the first time since entering the palace. "My ship was shot down during a skirmish with the same enemy fleet. Different mission, same bad luck. We both ended up stranded," Virelia continued. "The wastes were crawling with enemy patrols. The air was thin, the ground unstable. Every night, the sky burned with lightning storms. But he," she glanced at Elias, "kept us alive. He built shelter from scrap, found water where I swore there was none, and fought off a hunting pack with nothing but a blade when our weapons failed." Theryx studied Elias for a long moment. "And why did you help her?" Elias shrugged. "Because she was alive? And because she didn't give up? even when she should have. The king's eyes narrowed slightly at the human's bluntness, but there was no disrespect in his tone, only truth. A soft chime sounded from the wall console. Marvik's voice came through, tight with urgency. "Your Majesty, I request immediate audience. There is concern in the council about this human's presence." Theric sighed. "Send them to the council chamber. I will join them shortly." When the voice faded, he turned to Virelia. "You know this will not be simple. The court will not trust him." "They don't have to," she said. "They only need to trust me." Elias leaned back slightly against the wall. "If this is going to cause you trouble, I can disappear into whatever passes for a crowd here. I didn't come to start political fires." Virelia gave him a sharp look. "You're not going anywhere." Theric said nothing for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "You will both remain in the palace under guard, for your safety. If anyone wishes to challenge your presence here, they will do so to my face." Outside, the news was already spreading like wildfire. The lost princess had returned. The human beside her had become a figure of instant speculation. Hero, mercenary, spy. Some called him the savior of the royal heir. Others whispered he was a weapon planted by an unknown power. In the council chamber, the High Chancellor prepared his case to limit the human's access to the palace. Rival factions began debating how this would affect trade, alliances, and military policy. And in the highest tower, King Theric stood at the window, watching the city's lights glow in the gathering dusk. His daughter was alive. That was all. That mattered, for now. But deep in his chest, he knew the arrival of the human was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The council chamber was tense when King Theric entered. The long oval table of polished obsidian reflected the pale blue ceiling lights. Around it sat the most powerful figures in the Zirath kingdom: generals, governors, trade ministers, and the ever-watchful High Chancellor Marvik. Every pair of eyes followed the king as he took his seat at the head of the table. 2 guards stood by the door, their weapons ready but discreet. "Before we discuss rebuilding," Theric said, his deep voice echoing in the chamber, "you will hear my daughter's account of what happened after the fall of Zaren IV." The murmur of voices quieted instantly. The doors opened, and Princess Virelia stepped inside. She walked with the same confidence she had shown on the battlefield, though her armor was still scratched and worn from her time in the wilderness. Behind her came Elias Ward. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room in a soldier's way, counting exits, noting who sat closest to the king, who looked hostile. Several council members stiffened at his presence. Others whispered behind cupped hands. The king gestured for them to stand before the table. "Speak," he told Virelia. She began simply. "You know the official story, the one recorded in the war logs. My ship was destroyed during the evacuation, but that's not where it ended." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, painting the picture in the minds of everyone present. "When I landed on Zaren IV, the planet was already under enemy control. The sky was full of their ships. I hid in the wreck of my escape pod for 2 days before I dared to move. The wastes were a nightmare, razor storms, ground that swallowed you whole, and patrols searching for survivors." She looked toward Elias. "On the 3rd day, I saw smoke from another crash. I thought it was a civilian ship. Instead, I found him, Captain Elias Ward, injured but alive. He had been shot down while on a mission far from home." Elias took over, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of memory. "My orders were simple. Disrupt enemy supply lines in the sector. My fleet got hit harder than we expected. I bailed out in the atmosphere, barely made it to the ground in one piece. When the princess found me, I was running low on ammo and water," Virelia continued. "From then on, we worked together. The enemy controlled the air, so we had to Move at night. We avoided patrols, scavenged wrecks for supplies, and stayed alive one day at a time. Marvick leaned forward, his voice cold. And what of your ship's beacon? Why was there no distress signal for our fleets to track? Because the enemy was tracking beacons too, Elias said bluntly. Light up a signal, and you'd get a strike team on your position in minutes. We stayed dark because we wanted to keep breathing. The Chancellor didn't hide his displeasure at the human speaking without invitation. Convenient explanation, he muttered. Virelia's eyes flashed. Convenient? He saved my life more times than I can count. He fought beside me when every step meant death. If you think that's convenient, then you've never been on a battlefield. The room went quiet. She continued, her tone softer now. We weren't just hiding. We were looking for a way off the planet. Weeks passed before we got the chance. A small enemy supply outpost was operating in the northern canyons. Elias came up with the plan. We'd take it, steal one of their transports, and break through the blockade. Elias's lips twitched into the smallest of smiles. Wasn't much of a plan, more like a last gamble. It worked, Virelia said, but not without cost. The outpost was heavily guarded. We fought through their soldiers, disabled their comms, and flew out in a damaged transport. The blockade chased us halfway across the sector, Elias added. We took some creative routes, and by routes I mean asteroid fields, storm clouds, and one jump through a collapsing wormhole. Not exactly safe. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. The story was unbelievable, but the princess stood here alive, and the human beside her bore the same scars. Marvick spoke again. Even if all this is true, we must ask, why bring the human here? Why not part ways once you reached friendly space? Virelia looked the Chancellor in the eye. Because I trust him. And because he has seen things, enemy tactics, technology, supply routes, that could help us. The war may be over, but the threat is not gone. You all know that. General Korath, the veteran with the artificial arm, grunted in agreement. The princess is right. We drove them back, but they'll return. This human may have intelligence worth more than half our fleets. The king finally spoke again. I believe my daughter. And I believe the man who brought her home. He will be treated as a guest of the crown, not a prisoner. That declaration sent a ripple through the council. Some nodded reluctantly. Others looked displeased, but none dared challenge the king outright. Marvick, however, was not finished. Your Majesty, you take a dangerous risk. A human in our palace will be seen as weakness by our rivals. And if the people believe he has influence over the princess, they will believe the truth, Tharix interrupted sharply, that he risked his life to save hers, and that is all they need to know. When the meeting ended, Virelia and Elias followed the king into a smaller chamber, here. Without the council's eyes, Tharix's expression softened for the first time. I thought I had lost you, he said quietly to his daughter. I thought you had too, she replied. The king looked at Elias. You could have left her. You didn't. For that you have my thanks. Elias shifted slightly. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it was the right thing. Tharix studied him for a moment. Perhaps that is why my daughter trusts you. That night, the palace was quieter than usual. Virelia retired to her old chambers, though they felt different now, too. Clean, too untouched, after months in the dust and chaos of survival. Elias was given a guest room nearby, though 2 guards stood outside his door. He didn't mind. He had been in stranger places and under tighter watch. From the balcony of his room, he looked out over the alien city. Towers rose like crystal spears, glowing faintly in the night. Airships moved between docking spires, their lights tracing slow paths through the dark. Somewhere out there, he knew, enemies were regrouping. Inside the palace, Virelia stood at her own window, looking at the same city from another angle. She wondered what tomorrow would bring, how the people would react to her return, and how they would see Elias. Neither of them knew that even now, far from the capital, an encrypted message was being sent. A shadowy figure spoke in a low voice to an unseen listener. "The princess has returned," the voice said. "And she's brought a human. This complicates things." The reply was cold and certain. "Then we'll remove him, quietly, before he becomes a problem." This was not the end of their fight. It was only the beginning of a new war, one fought in halls of power, with whispers instead of weapons, and Elias Ward had just stepped into the center of it. The grand halls of the Zirath royal palace were alive with whispers, suspicion, and unease. The return of Princess Virelia was already stirring the court, but the presence of the human, Captain Elias Ward, had ignited a storm no one could ignore. King Tharic sat in his throne room, surrounded by his closest advisors. The tension in the room was thick, as if the very air weighed heavy with mistrust. The High Chancellor, Marvick, stood nearby, his silver scales shimmering under the soft lights. His gaze was sharp, almost accusing, as he addressed the king. "Your Majesty," Marvick began, "this human's presence among us is more than a mere inconvenience. It threatens the stability of the throne. The nobles murmur, the generals question, and the people. They will fear what they do not understand." Tharic listened carefully. He had seen this reaction before, the fear of the unknown, the fear of change. Yet, he also knew the truth that only Virelia and Elias could tell. "I understand the risks," the king replied calmly. "But I trust my daughter's judgment. Elias saved her life. That bond is stronger than any suspicion." Marvick shook his head. "Trust is not enough. You must consider the whispers, the jealousies. The council factions will use this as a weapon. We must act cautiously." Before the king could respond, the doors to the throne room burst open. A breathless messenger rushed in. "Your Majesty!" An attempt was made on the princess's life. The room erupted into chaos. Guards surged forward, weapons drawn. Tharic's heart sank. This was no ordinary threat. It was a declaration that the court itself had enemies hidden within. Virelia entered the room, her face pale but determined. "I am unharmed," she said firmly. "But whoever planned this is close. They know I have returned." Elias stepped beside her, his eyes burning with protective fury. "We cannot wait for them to strike again. We must find the traitors." Tharic nodded. "You two will work together. Use all resources at your disposal. The safety of the princess and the kingdom depends on it." Over the next days, the palace became a hive of investigation and guarded alliances. Virelia and Elias moved through the shadowed corridors, questioning servants, officials, and soldiers. The palace staff was loyal but frightened. Some whispered of secret meetings held under the cover of night, of deals made behind closed doors. Elias noted the cold stares from some nobles, the veiled threats disguised as polite conversation. He understood now that survival was no longer just about fighting enemies in the field. It was about navigating a labyrinth of politics and power. One evening, in a secluded chamber, Virelia and Elias reviewed a series of intercepted messages. The code was complex, but Elias's experience helped unravel the patterns. "These messages point to a faction within the High Council," Elias said grimly. "They're coordinating with external enemies, possibly the very forces that attacked. Zarin IV. Virelia clenched her fists. "They betrayed us. They betrayed the kingdom." The weight of betrayal pressed down on them, but it also steeled their resolve. As tension mounted, an emergency council meeting was called. The nobles gathered in the chamber, their faces masks of concern and ambition. Marvick took the floor, outlining the danger posed by internal traitors and the threat Elias represented. Several voices called for Elias's immediate exile or imprisonment, arguing that his presence endangered the kingdom's unity. Virelia rose, her voice clear and commanding. "This man saved my life. He stands with me and with the kingdom. If you cannot see that, then you are part of the problem." Her words silenced the room. Even Marvik's scowl softened for a moment. King Theryx spoke then, his tone resolute. "Let it be known, Captain Elias Ward is under my protection. Any harm that comes to him will be considered an attack on the crown itself." The council grudgingly agreed to allow Elias to remain, but the hostility in their eyes remained. In the days that followed, Virelia and Elias continued their search for the conspirators. Their investigation led them through secret passages and forgotten archives, uncovering evidence of betrayal and sabotage. One night, as they prepared to confront a suspect, an explosion rocked the palace grounds. Alarms blared, and smoke filled the corridors. Rushing to the scene, they found the aftermath of an attack aimed at the princess's quarters. The assassin had fled, leaving behind clues pointing to a high-ranking official. Virelia's voice trembled with fury. "They want me dead. They want to silence the truth." Elias vowed, "They won't succeed, not while I stand by your side." The palace had become a battlefield, not of soldiers and weapons, but of secrets and shadows. Trust was scarce, and every ally could be a potential enemy. Yet through it all, the bond between Virelia and Elias grew stronger, a testament to resilience, loyalty, and the unbreakable spirit of survival. King Theryx watched from his chambers, proud of his daughter's courage and wary of the storm yet to come. The war had ended, but a new fight had begun, one that would test the very heart of the kingdom. The palace was quieter than usual that morning, but the air held a charged tension, like the calm before a storm. Guards patrolled the corridors with sharpened vigilance, eyes darting toward every shadow. King Theryx sat in his private chambers, his gaze distant as he thought of all that had passed since his daughter's return. Outside, the city of Zirath buzzed with whispered rumors and speculation. The people were divided. Some hailed the princess's return as a miracle. Others feared the presence of the human soldier at her side. The court's factions simmered with unease, waiting for the right moment to strike. But the greatest danger was still unseen. Virelia and Elias had become inseparable partners in this new war. Every day they trained with palace guards, planned security improvements, and followed new leads on the conspirators hiding within the kingdom's walls. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the city, an urgent message arrived. "Your Highness," a breathless messenger said, "there's been movement near the palace gates. Unidentified forces approaching fast." Virelia's heart raced. She exchanged a glance with Elias. Without hesitation, they rushed to the palace command center. The holographic display showed multiple ships closing in, cloaked in stealth technology but leaving faint energy trails. They were too close to be a coincidence. Elias clenched his jaw. "They're here for us," the king's voice crackled through the comm. "Prepare the defenses. I want every soldier ready." As the enemy fleet emerged from the shadows, alarms blared across the palace. Guards scrambled to their stations while Virelia and Elias stood side by side, ready to face whatever came. The enemy ships unleashed a barrage of fire, but the palace shields held strong. Still, their focus was clear, not just to attack, but to breach the inner sanctum. Inside the command center, Elias worked quickly, coordinating counterattacks and defense maneuvers. His human tactics, honed in countless battles, proved invaluable. He spotted weak points and called for precise strikes that disrupted the enemy formation. Virelia led a squad of elite guards to reinforce the palace perimeter. Her presence inspired the soldiers, reminding them that their princess had survived the worst and returned stronger. Amid the chaos, a sudden explosion rocked the command center. Smoke filled the room as power flickered. Elias shouted orders to keep control. but it was clear the enemy had infiltrators inside the palace. The king's voice came over the comm again, firm and commanding. "Hold the line. Protect the princess at all costs." Virelia and Elias exchanged a determined look and moved swiftly to secure the vulnerable corridors leading to the throne room. In the dimly lit halls, shadows moved. A group of assassins, hired by traitors, attempted to strike. Elias drew his rifle, his aim steady despite the tight space. Virelia fought fiercely with her blade, cutting down attackers with skill and precision. They backed each other up, their teamwork seamless. It was clear they trusted each other with their lives. After the fight, as silence returned, Elias caught his breath and looked at Virelia. "We can't keep running," he said. "We have to end this from within." Virelia nodded. "Agreed. We expose the traitors, or they will destroy us all." They returned to the throne room where the king waited. He studied the two warriors before him, his daughter and the human who had become her protector. "Today," he said, "you have proven your loyalty and courage, not just to me, but to all of Zirath." He stepped down from his throne and approached. "Elias." "With this," he said, removing a shining medallion from his neck, "I name you Friend of the Crown. Wear it as a symbol of trust, honor, and alliance." Elias accepted the medallion with quiet respect. The court watched in stunned silence. Some faces softened with acceptance. Others still held doubt, but none could deny the bond forged in battle. In the days that followed, investigations uncovered the traitors, high-ranking officials who had conspired with enemy forces for power and wealth. They were arrested or fled, their plots broken. The king made sweeping reforms to secure the kingdom's future, including strengthening alliances with human factions across the stars. Virelia stood at the forefront of this new era, stronger, wiser, and unafraid. Elias, now a trusted advisor and warrior, stood by her side. Their friendship had grown into something deeper, a partnership built on respect, shared hardship, and hope. One evening, under a sky full of stars, Virelia and Elias walked along the palace gardens. "You changed everything," she said softly. Elias smiled. "No, you did. I just helped you find your way home." She laughed lightly. "Maybe, but I think we found a new way forward, together." The kingdom was no longer the same place it had been before the war. It was stronger, united by a bond between two worlds, and for the first time in a long time, King Theryx believed. That hope was not just a fragile shadow, but a bright, lasting light.